The year was 2847, and humanity had changed in ways that their ancestors could never have imagined. 600 years ago, humans had taken their first steps beyond Earth, reaching for the stars with trembling hands and hopeful hearts. Now, they lived across 47 star systems, their colonies scattered like seeds across the galaxy. They had built cities on frozen moons, farming stations in asteroid belts, and research facilities orbiting distant suns. The United Earth Coalition governed them all, a government built on principles of peace, cooperation, and mutual respect. Chancellor Maria Santos had led the coalition for 12 years. She was a small woman with gray hair and tired eyes, but her voice carried the weight of billions. Under her guidance, humanity had made contact with 17 different alien species. Some were peaceful traders. Others were cautious observers. A few had become genuine friends, and with each new species, humanity had extended the same offer. Let us be partners, not enemies. Admiral Daniel Cooper stood alone on the observation deck of the diplomatic vessel, Horizon's Grace. He was 53 years old. With a weathered face and hands that had seen both war and peace, outside the thick windows, a purple nebula swirled in patterns that no human artist could capture. The ship was traveling through the most dangerous region of known space, heading toward the territory of the Vexry Dominion. Behind him, the door opened with a soft hiss. Ambassador Lisa Moore walked in, holding a data tablet in her hands. She was younger than Daniel, perhaps 40, with kind eyes and a calm voice that had talked down more conflicts than most soldiers had fought. "The translation matrices are ready," Lisa said, standing beside him. "We can communicate with them clearly now. No more misunderstandings." Daniel did not turn from the window. 300,000 dead, he said quietly. 17 colonies burned to ash. Children taken as slaves. And we are still trying to talk to them. Lisa placed a gentle hand on his arm. "That is who we are, Daniel. That is what makes us human. We exhaust every peaceful option before we consider anything else. If we abandon that principle, we become no better than them." The Vexry were a nightmare made flesh. They had evolved on a heavy world where only the strongest survived. Their bodies were massive, covered in thick scales that could stop a bullet. Their minds were sharp but cruel, focused entirely on dominance and conquest. They viewed the universe as a hunting ground, and every other species as either predator or prey. For 30 years, the Vexry had raided human frontier colonies. Their attacks came without warning, their ships appearing from the void like sharks smelling blood. They killed without mercy, took prisoners for sport, and broadcast their victories across space to terrify other species into submission. Their leader, a massive creature called Dominant Krell, had made it his personal mission to prove that humans were nothing but soft prey animals pretending to be something more. The last 3 human ambassadors had been executed publicly. Krell had torn them apart with his own claws while his followers watched and cheered. The footage had been sent to every human world, a message that could not be misunderstood. We do not want your peace. On Earth, the people had demanded war. Millions marched in the streets, calling for the military to strike back. Families who had lost loved ones screamed for vengeance. Young people enlisted in the defense forces in numbers not seen for centuries. But President Samuel Gray had refused. He was an old man now, 71 years old, with white hair and a soft voice. His own daughter had died in the Epsilon Eridani massacre, burned alive when the Vexry set fire to a refugee shelter. Yet he stood before the coalition assembly and spoke words that shocked many and angered more. "We will try once more," Samuel had said, his voice barely above a whisper, but carrying across the silent chamber. "We will send another mission of peace, because that is what separates us from the monsters. That is what makes us worth saving." So here they were, the Horizon's Grace, carrying 40 crew members and 1 ambassador, flying into the territory of beings who had promised to kill them all. Their weapons were powered down, their shields minimal. They broadcast peace signals on every frequency. Announcing their intentions to anyone who would listen, the ship carried gifts as well. Dr. Henry Martin, The Coalition's leading xenobiologist had developed a cure for the Vexery Plague, a disease that had killed nearly 1 billion of their people over the past century. The ship's cargo holds contained enough medicine to save millions more. They also brought agricultural technology that could triple food production on Vexery worlds, and star charts showing resource-rich systems that no species had yet claimed. "Maybe this time will be different," Lisa said, though her voice did not sound convinced. "Maybe when they see what we bring, they will understand that cooperation is better than conflict." Daniel finally turned to look at her. His eyes were filled with something that might have been pity. "You don't believe that?" he said. "You can't. Not after everything." Lisa was quiet for a moment. Then she smiled, a sad and tired expression. "I have to believe it, Daniel. The moment I stop believing that peace is possible, I become useless. Hope is the only weapon I carry." The ship's intercom crackled to life. "Admiral Cooper, Ambassador Moore, please report to the bridge. We are entering Vexery space." They walked together through the narrow corridors, past crew members who tried to hide their fear behind professional expressions. Everyone knew what had happened to the previous missions. Everyone knew the odds of returning home alive. Captain Richard Palmer stood at the command console, his young face pale but determined. He was only 32, the youngest captain in the diplomatic fleet, chosen specifically because he had no history of conflict with the Vexery. A fresh face, the planners had reasoned. Someone they might be willing to talk to. "We are receiving signals from multiple sources," Richard reported. "Vexery military frequencies. They know we are here." Lisa stepped forward, her data tablet ready. "Open a channel. Broadcast our peaceful intentions and our desire to speak with Dominic Krell directly." The communications officer, a young woman named Amy Chen, worked her console with trembling fingers. "Channel open, Ambassador." Lisa spoke clearly and calmly, her words translated instantly into the harsh Vexery language. She explained that humanity came in peace, seeking understanding and cooperation. She described the gifts they carried, the medicine that could save Vexery lives, the technology that could feed their hungry worlds. She asked only for a chance to talk, to find common ground, to build a future where both species could prosper. The response came 3 minutes later. Not in words, but in action. 12 Vexery warships dropped out of faster-than-light travel, surrounding the Horizon's Grace in a perfect sphere of death. Their weapons powered up, filling the space around them with the glow of charged plasma and the hum of targeting systems. On the bridge, Amy's voice shook as she reported what the sensors showed. "They're locking weapons on us, Admiral. All 12 ships. We cannot survive this." Daniel looked at Lisa, who was still holding her tablet, still hoping for a miracle that would never come. He thought about his wife back on Earth, about his grandchildren who had never known war, about the peaceful future that humanity had tried so hard to build. "It seems," he said quietly, "that they have made their choice." The first plasma bolt struck the ship before he could finish speaking. The Horizon's Grace had carried a message of peace across the stars. The Vexery answered with fire. The Horizon's Grace was dying. Plasma fire tore through her hull like claws through paper, ripping open decks and venting atmosphere into the cold void of space. Emergency alarms screamed through every corridor as crew members ran for the escape pods. Their training, overcoming their terror. Admiral Daniel Cooper grabbed a young ensign who had frozen in shock and shoved him toward the evacuation route. "Move," he shouted over the chaos. "Get to the pods. That is an order." On the bridge, Captain Richard Palmer was trying to coordinate the evacuation while his ship fell apart around him. Sparks flew from damaged consoles. The lights flickered between normal and emergency red. Through the cracked windows, he could see Vexery boarding craft approaching, their angular shapes like predators closing in for the kill. "All hands." "Abandoned ship," Richard announced, his voice steady, despite the fear that gripped his heart. "Repeat, all hands abandoned ship. This is not a drill." Ambassador Lisa Moore stood at the communications console, her fingers flying across the controls. She was not heading for the escape pods. Instead, she was preparing one final transmission. A message that would be sent to Earth no matter what happened next. Daniel found her there when he came to clear the bridge. "Lisa, we have to go. The boarding parties will be here in minutes." She looked at him with eyes that held no fear, only a deep and terrible sadness. "I need to send this message, Daniel. The people back home need to know what happened here. They need to see the truth, if you can send it from an escape pod." Lisa shook her head. "The Vexery are jamming our communications. The only transmitter strong enough to break through is the main array, and someone has to stay here to operate it." She smiled, a gentle expression that reminded Daniel of his own daughter. "Get the crew out. Save as many as you can. Tell the president that we tried." "We really tried," Daniel wanted to argue. He wanted to drag her away from that console and force her into an escape pod. But he knew her well enough to understand that nothing would change her mind. Some people were simply born to sacrifice themselves for others. "I will tell them," he said. "I will make sure everyone knows what you did here." He left her there alone on the dying bridge and ran for the escape pods. Behind him, Lisa began recording her final message. The Vexery boarding party arrived 3 minutes later. They were massive creatures, each one standing over 2 meters tall. Their bodies covered in gray scales that seemed to absorb the light. They moved with the confidence of predators who had never known fear, their weapons raised and ready. Lisa did not run. She stood at the console, her transmission still broadcasting, and faced them with a calm that seemed to confuse the Vexery warriors. They had expected screaming, begging, the desperate flailing of prey animals facing their end. Instead, they found a small human woman looking at them with something that might have been pity. "I am Ambassador Lisa Moore of the United Earth Coalition," she said, knowing that her words were being broadcast to every receiver in range. "We came here in peace. We brought gifts that could have saved millions of your people. We asked only for a chance to talk, to understand each other, to find a better way." The lead Vexery, a scarred veteran with one missing eye, laughed. It was an ugly sound, like rocks grinding together. "Prey does not talk," he said. "Prey runs and dies." Lisa nodded slowly. "Then I suppose I am not prey." The veteran raised his weapon. "You are whatever we say you are." The footage of what happened next was broadcast across the galaxy. Dominic Krell had ordered it, wanting every species to see what happened to those who opposed the Vexery. He expected the recording to spread fear. He did not understand humans well enough to predict what it would actually spread on Earth. President Samuel Gray watched the transmission in his private office. His cabinet members stood around him in horrified silence. Fleet Admiral Patricia Hughes, a tall woman with iron-gray hair and a face carved from stone, had to look away when the worst of it came. The recording ended, but no one spoke. The silence stretched on for what felt like hours. Finally, Secretary of Defense Kevin Walsh cleared his throat. "Sir, the Vexery have followed up with an official declaration. They claim all human space as their hunting grounds. They have given us 30 days to surrender or face total war." Samuel did not respond. He sat very still, staring at the blank screen where Lisa's face had been moments before. His hands rested on his desk, completely motionless. "Sir," Patricia said gently, "we have options. The defense fleet is ready to mobilize. Our soldiers are prepared to fight. We have been building our strength for decades, hoping we would never need it. But if you give the order—" "I wanted peace," Samuel said, his voice barely a whisper. "I truly believe that if we just kept trying, if we showed them enough kindness, they would eventually understand. I believe that everyone, even the Vexery, had some good in them that we could reach." He stood slowly, like a man carrying a weight that had suddenly become too heavy to bear. He walked to the window and looked out at the city below, at the millions of people going about their lives, unaware of the storm that was about to break. "I was wrong," Samuel continued. "I was so focused on who we wanted to be that I forgot who we also are. We are not just peaceful farmers and curious scientists. We are also the species that survived ice ages and plagues and wars that killed hundreds of millions. We are the descendants of warriors and survivors, of people who looked at impossible odds and refused to surrender." He turned back to face his cabinet. Something had changed in his eyes. The gentle old man who had preached peace for so long was still there, but he had been joined by something older and darker, something that had been buried deep in human nature since the first ancestor picked up a rock and refused to be prey. "Open a channel," Samuel said. "To everyone. Every species in the galaxy that can receive our signal. I want them all to hear this." The technicians worked quickly. Within minutes, President Gray's face appeared on screens across known space. In the council chambers of peaceful species, in the war rooms of aggressive empires, in the halls of the Vexery Dominion itself, humanity's leaders spoke. "For 600 years," Samuel began, his voice clear and steady, "humanity has reached out with open hands. We offered friendship to every species we met. We shared our technology, our medicine, our art, our knowledge. We absorbed insults and endured attacks and buried our dead. And still we came back to the negotiating table, because we believed in peace. We believed in understanding. We believed that violence was never the answer." He paused, and when he spoke again, his voice had hardened into something that made even his own cabinet members take a step back. "We were wrong to think that everyone shared these beliefs. Some species do not want peace. Some species see kindness as weakness and mercy as foolishness. Some species only understand one language, and today, we will begin speaking it." Samuel looked directly into the camera, his eyes meeting the gaze of trillions of beings across the stars. "To the Vexery Dominion, you have killed our people. You have rejected our friendship. You have murdered our ambassadors and laughed at our grief. You thought this made you strong? You thought we would cower and surrender. You were wrong." His next words would echo through history for centuries to come. "We tried peace. Now you will meet the other side of humans." The transmission ended with coordinates and a date. Nothing more. Across the galaxy, every species that had ever wondered about humanity's true nature began to prepare for the answer. And in the darkest corners of human space, in facilities that officially did not exist, alarms began to sound and ancient. Machines began to wake. The other side of humanity was about to introduce itself, deep beneath the frozen surface of Pluto. In a facility that appeared on no official records, Dr. Henry Martin received the message he had dreaded for 40 years. The old scientist sat in his small office, surrounded by screens showing data that would have meant nothing to anyone outside his team. His hands trembled slightly as he read the activation order. The Prometheus initiative was no longer theoretical. It was now operational. Henry was 73 years old. He had spent his entire adult life working on this project, developing weapons and soldiers that humanity hoped would never be needed. Every morning for 4 decades he had woken up praying that today would not be the day. Every night he had gone to sleep relieved that peace had held for one more day. Now peace had failed, and his work would finally be used. He pressed the intercom button on his desk. "All department heads report to the main assembly hall. Priority Alpha. This is not a drill." The Prometheus facility was massive, stretching for kilometers beneath Pluto's surface. It housed laboratories, training centers, weapons factories, and most importantly, the cryogenic storage units where 10,000 volunteers slept in frozen suspension. Waiting for the call that had finally come, Admiral Patricia Hughes appeared on his screen minutes later, her face grim but determined. She had flown from Earth on the fastest ship available as soon as President Gray had given his speech. "How long until full deployment?" Patricia asked without greeting. Henry checked his displays. 72 hours for the soldiers. The weapon systems can be activated immediately. The new ships will need another week to complete their final checks. You may not have a week. Intelligence reports suggest the Vexery are already mobilizing. They took the president's message as a declaration of war. "It was a declaration of war," Henry said quietly. "The first one humanity has made in 300 years. Patricia nodded. "And it will be the last one we need to make. Once the galaxy sees what we have been hiding, no one will challenge us again." Henry wanted to believe that, but he had his doubts. The weapons he had created were terrible beyond imagination. The soldiers he had helped design were no longer entirely human. Once these things were unleashed, the universe would never see humanity the same way again. "Admiral," he said, choosing his words carefully, I need to warn you about what we are about to release. The Prometheus soldiers, the new ships, the weapons systems. They were all built with one purpose: to win wars quickly and completely. They were not designed for restraint or mercy. Once we activate them, controlling them will be extremely difficult. Patricia's expression did not change. Then let us hope the Vexery surrender quickly. The awakening began within the hour. In the cryogenic chambers, thousands of pods began their warming cycles. Each pod contained a volunteer who had been transformed through genetic engineering, cybernetic enhancement, and psychological conditioning into something more than human. They were faster, stronger, smarter, and more deadly than any natural being. They had given up normal lives to become weapons, hoping they would never be used. Commander Ryan Blake was among the first to wake. He was 47 years old physically, though he had spent only 17 of those years conscious. The rest had been cold sleep, dreamless darkness, while he waited for humanity to need him. As the pod opened and warm air rushed over his skin, memories flooded back. He remembered his childhood on New Helsinki Colony, a beautiful world of forests and lakes. He remembered the day the Vexery came, the sky turning red with plasm. Of fire, the screams of his neighbors as they were hunted through the streets. He remembered hiding in a drainage pipe while his parents died above him, their final screams cut short by Vexery claws. He had been 16 years old. He had sworn then that if humanity ever fought back, he would be on the front lines. The Prometheus program had given him that chance. A medical technician approached his pod, checking his vital signs. "Commander Blake, how do you feel?" Ryan climbed out of the pod, his enhanced muscles responding perfectly despite 3 decades of sleep. "I feel ready," he said. "When do we deploy?" "Soon. Admiral Hughes wants all unit commanders in the briefing room within the hour." Around him, other pods were opening. Men and women from every human world. Volunteers who had chosen to become something more than human for the sake of humanity itself. They had trained together, fought simulated battles together, prepared for a war they hoped would never come. Now that hope was dead, and their purpose was finally clear. The briefing room was enormous. Designed to hold all 10,000 Prometheus soldiers at once, Ryan took his place at the front, surrounded by the other commanders. Admiral Hughes stood at the podium, her face displayed on screens throughout the room. 30 years ago, Patricia began, the Vexery killed their first human colonist. Since then, they have murdered over 300,000 of our people. They have burned 17 of our worlds. They have taken our children as slaves and eaten our dead as trophies. And through all of this, we have tried to make peace. She paused, letting the words sink in. That time is over. President Gray has authorized full military response. The coordinates broadcast in his message lead to a neutral star system empty of civilians. The Vexery fleet will meet us there in 5 days. Our job is simple. Demonstrate to the entire galaxy what happens when you push humanity too far. Screens changed, showing tactical displays and fleet positions. The Coalition has assembled every warship we have. Over 8,000 vessels will be waiting at those coordinates. But the core of our force will be you, the Prometheus soldiers, and the ships built specifically for you. New images appeared, showing vessels unlike anything the galaxy had ever seen. They were sleek and angular, their hulls seeming to absorb light rather than reflect it. The Prometheus-class battlecruisers, 9 ships that had existed only in rumor and classified files until now. Each of these ships carries weapons capable of destroying a planet, Patricia continued. We do not intend to use that capability, but the Vexery do not need to know that. They will see our strength and understand that we have been holding back. Ryan felt a strange mix of emotions. Pride in what humanity had built. Anticipation of finally facing the enemy that had destroyed his home. And underneath it all, a cold certainty that nothing would ever be the same after this day. Meanwhile, across human space, the news of President Gray's broadcast had spread. The reaction was immediate and overwhelming. Young people lined up at recruitment, centers in numbers that exceeded all predictions. Veterans who had retired decades ago dug out their old uniforms and reported for duty. Scientists abandoned their research to work on weapons systems. Factories that had been building consumer goods for generations retooled for war production in a matter of days. On Earth, in cities and towns across every continent, people gathered to watch the news and discuss what was happening. The fear was real, but so was something else, something that had been sleeping in human hearts for centuries. It was the old fire, the stubborn refusal to surrender. The fury of a species that had fought its way from caves to stars. Margaret Kelly was 87 years old, living in a small apartment in Boston. Her grandmother had been a soldier in the last major war, 2 centuries ago. Margaret had always thought those days were gone forever, that humanity had evolved beyond such violence. Watching the news coverage, seeing the young people marching off to training camps, she felt something she had not expected. Pride. Not pride in war itself, but pride in humanity's ability to finally stand up for itself. To say no more to those who had treated them as prey, she looked at the old photograph on her wall, showing her grandmother in uniform. "You always said it would happen again someday," Margaret whispered. "I did not believe you. I was wrong." In the Prometheus facility, Commander Ryan Blake finished strapping on his combat armor. It fit perfectly, responding to his enhanced body like a second skin. He looked at his reflection in the metal wall, seeing the warrior he had become. Somewhere out there, the Vexari were preparing for battle. They believed they were hunting prey. They did not understand that the prey had been waiting for this moment, preparing for it, dreaming of it. Ryan smiled. And it was not a gentle expression. "They wanted to meet the other side of humans," he said to himself. "Let us make sure they never forget it." The awakening was complete. The weapons were ready. The soldiers were prepared. Humanity was going to war. The star system had no name, just a catalog number that astronomers had assigned centuries ago. It was a dead place, a dim red sun, surrounded by nothing but dust and debris. No planets, no moons, no stations. President Gray had chosen it specifically for this reason. Whatever happened here, no innocent beings would be caught in the crossfire. The United Earth Coalition fleet arrived first. Over 8,000 warships emerged from faster-than-light travel, their formation expanding to fill the empty space around the dying star. Destroyers and cruisers took their positions on the outer edges, their sensors scanning for any sign of the enemy. Carriers released swarms of fighter craft that moved like schools of fish through the void. And at the center of the formation, the 9 Prometheus-class battlecruisers glowed with barely contained power. Admiral Patricia commanded the fleet from the bridge of the Coalition flagship. The Unity's will. She had spent 40 years in the military. Rising from a young ensign to the highest position in the defense forces, she had hoped to retire without ever fighting a major battle. That hope had died with Ambassador Lisa Moore. "All ships report ready," her executive officer announced. "Weapons charged, shields at full power. The Prometheus units are standing by." Patricia nodded. "Good. Now we wait." They did not have to wait long. The Vexari fleet emerged from faster-than-light travel like a swarm of angry insects. 3,000 warships, each one bristling with weapons, each one crewed by warriors who had never known defeat. At the center of their formation flew the Dominant's Pride, the personal flagship of Dominant Krell himself. Krell stood on his bridge, surrounded by his most loyal officers. He was massive, even by Vexari standards, standing nearly 3 meters tall, his scales scarred from countless battles. In his culture, scars were marks of honor, and Krell's body was a tapestry of violence. "Look at them," he said, gesturing at the tactical display showing the human fleet. "So many ships? They have been building in secret, hiding their strength while pretending to be weak." "Dominant," one of his officers said nervously. "Perhaps we should be cautious. The humans have never shown this level of military capability before." Krell laughed, a sound like thunder rolling across mountains. "They are prey. It does not matter how many weapons they carry. Prey cannot change its nature. When the battle begins, they will run and scatter, just as they always do." He raised his voice so that everyone on the bridge could hear. "Today, we prove to the galaxy that humans are nothing but soft creatures who play at being warriors. Today, we begin the harvest that will feed the Dominion for generations." The Vexery ships began their approach, spreading into an attack formation that had crushed countless enemies before. Their weapons powered up, filling the space between the fleets with the glow of charging plasma and the hum of targeting systems. On the Unity's will, Admiral Hughes watched them come. Her face showed no emotion, but her heart was beating faster than it had in years. "Signal all ships," she said. "Execute Battle Plan Alpha." What happened next would be studied in military academies across the galaxy for centuries. The human fleet did not scatter or retreat as the Vexery had expected. Instead, it moved like a single organism, each ship coordinating perfectly with every other. The outer destroyers surged forward, their weapons firing in precise patterns that overwhelmed Vexery shields through sheer coordination. The cruisers provided covering fire, their advanced targeting systems, hitting critical systems with surgical accuracy. But the true shock came from the Prometheus ship's commander. Ryan Blake stood in the deployment bay of the battlecruiser Vengeance, surrounded by 500 of his fellow enhanced soldiers. They wore combat armor that made them look more like machines than humans, their faces hidden behind helmets that displayed tactical information directly to their enhanced brains. "Boarding teams, prepare for deployment," the ship's AI announced. "Target, Dominance Pride. Mission, capture or elimination of enemy command structure." Ryan checked his weapons one final time. His rifle was a prototype that did not officially exist, capable of firing projectiles at speeds that would punch through any known armor. His backup weapons included grenades that could disrupt electronic systems, blades that could cut through Vexery scales, and his own enhanced body, which was perhaps the deadliest weapon of all. "Remember what they did to New Helsinki?" he said to his team. "Remember what they did to all our colonies? Today, we show them what fear feels like." The boarding craft launched from the Vengeance, screaming through space toward the Vexery flagship. All around them, the battle raged. Human ships cut through Vexery formations with unexpected ferocity, their weapons technology proving far superior to anything the enemy had anticipated. The Prometheus-class battlecruisers demonstrated capabilities that seemed impossible. Their main weapons bent space itself, creating gravitational anomalies that crushed Vexery ships like insects. Their shields absorbed punishment that would have destroyed any conventional vessel. And their secondary weapons, the ones designed for precision strikes, picked off enemy ships with mechanical efficiency. Within the first hour, the Vexery had lost over 500 ships. Within the second hour, that number had doubled. The hunters were becoming the hunted. Ryan's boarding craft punched through the Dominance Pride's weakened shields and attached to its hull. The soldiers cut through the metal with plasma torches, flooding into the enemy ship like water through a broken dam. The Vexery crew tried to stop them. They were massive warriors, trained from birth for combat, armed with weapons that had killed thousands of humans. But they had never faced anything like the Prometheus soldiers. Ryan moved through the corridors at speeds that the Vexery could barely track. His enhanced reflexes allowed him to dodge plasma bolts that should have been unavoidable. His enhanced strength let him tear through warriors twice his size. His enhanced mind processed tactical information in milliseconds, always knowing where the next threat would come from. Around him, his team performed similar feats. They moved like ghosts through the ship, leaving dead Vexery in their wake. The enemy's screams echoed through the corridors, sounds of terror from creatures who had never known what it meant to be prey. 1 hour after the boarding began, Ryan reached the bridge. The doors had been sealed and reinforced, but that only delayed him for 30 seconds. His plasma torch cut through the metal, and he stepped through the smoking gap to find Dominant Krell waiting for him. The Vexery leader stood alone. His officers lay dead around him, killed by his own hand when they suggested surrender. In each of his massive claws, he held a plasma blade, weapons that had ended the lives of countless enemies. "One human," Krell said, his voice filled with contempt. "They send one human against the Dominant. Your people are even more foolish than I thought." Ryan removed his helmet, letting Krell see his face. It was the face of a human, but the eyes were wrong. They held no fear, no hesitation, no mercy. They were the eyes of someone who had stopped being entirely human a long time ago. "You killed my family," Ryan said. "You burned my home. You murdered hundreds of thousands of my people and laughed about it." Krell shifted into a fighting stance. "And I will kill you now, little human. Your enhanced body means nothing against Vexori's strength. You are still prey." Ryan moved. It was not a fight in any traditional sense. Krell was fast and strong, and had been bred for combat since before he was born. But Ryan was something new, something that had been created specifically to defeat beings like Krell. Every movement was calculated. Every strike placed precisely where it would do the most damage, 30 seconds after it began. Dominant Krell lay dead on the deck of his own bridge. His plasma blades had not touched Ryan even once. Ryan stood over the body of the creature, who had haunted his dreams for 30 years. He expected to feel satisfaction, or at least relief. Instead, he felt only emptiness, the hollow knowledge that killing this monster would not bring back his family or repair the damage done to humanity. He activated his communication device. "This is Commander Blake. The Dominant is dead. Enemy flagship is secured." Outside, the battle was ending. The Vexori fleet, leaderless and outmatched, was in full retreat. Of the 3,000 ships that had arrived with such confidence, fewer than 800 escaped. The survivors carried tales back to the Dominion, stories of humans who fought like demons, whose technology seemed like magic, whose soldiers could not be stopped. The galaxy watched and trembled. The peaceful humans, the soft diplomats, the patient negotiators had shown another face, and that face was terrifying. Admiral Hughes surveyed the battlefield littered with the wreckage of Vexori ships. She felt no joy, only a grim satisfaction that the message had been delivered. "Signal all ships," she said. "The battle is over. Prepare for Phase 2. The war had only just begun. The war lasted 6 months. Though its outcome was never truly in doubt after the first battle, the Prometheus fleet pushed into Vexori space with relentless efficiency. Dismantling their military infrastructure system by system, shipyards that had built warships for centuries were captured or destroyed. Defense stations fell silent as human boarding parties overwhelmed their crews. The supply lines that had fed the Dominion's war machine were cut one by one. But President Samuel Gray, even in his anger, had not forgotten who humanity was supposed to be. He gave strict orders that were followed throughout the campaign. Civilian populations were not to be targeted. Cities were not to be bombarded from orbit. Food supplies and medical facilities were to be protected. Prisoners were to be treated with dignity. The war was against the Vexori military, not against the Vexori people. This approach confused many within the coalition military. Admiral Patricia Hughes argued for more aggressive tactics during a strategy meeting 3 months into the war. "We have the power to end this quickly," she said. "One strike against their homeworld, and the Dominion would surrender tomorrow. Every day we wait, more of our soldiers die." Samuel shook his head. "And every day, we show the galaxy that humanity can win a war without becoming monsters. That is worth the cost." The Admiral was not convinced, but she followed her orders. The war continued with strange rules that no previous conflict had seen, a perfect balance of overwhelming force and careful restraint. Commander Ryan Blake led many of the most difficult missions during those months. He rescued human prisoners from Vexori labor camps, liberating thousands who had been taken as slaves during the decades of raiding. He saw things in those camps that would haunt him forever. Evidence of cruelties that no sane species should ever commit. One rescue mission took him to a facility on a moon circling the Vexori homeworld. The guards had fled at the approach of his team, leaving behind hundreds of human children who had been born in captivity, who had never seen Earth or known freedom. A small girl, perhaps 6 years old, looked up at Ryan with eyes that had seen too much. "Are you here to hurt us?" she asked. Ryan knelt down to her level, removing his helmet so she could see his face. "No," he said gently. "We are here to take you home." The girl reached out and touched his cheek, as if she could not believe he was real. "What is home?" Ryan felt something break inside him, a wall he had built around his emotions during decades of training and waiting. He gathered the child in his arms and carried her to the evacuation shuttle. "Home is where people love you," he told her, "and you are going to have a lot of people who love you." The final battle of the war took place in orbit around the Vexery homeworld. The Coalition fleets surrounded the planet, their weapons capable of turning the surface to glass if given the order. Below, billions of Vexery waited to learn their fate. The new Vexery leader was called Subdominant Trell. He was younger than Krell had been, and he had opposed the old leader's aggression for years. Now, with his civilization facing extinction, he requested permission to negotiate. Admiral Hughes met him aboard a neutral station. Surrounded by guards and with her fleet ready to resume fighting at a moment's notice, Trell approached her alone, his scales dull with stress and exhaustion. "I must know," Trell said. "Why have you not destroyed us? Your weapons could sterilize our worlds and ours. We gave you every reason to hate us. We killed your people for sport. We murdered your ambassadors. We called you prey and laughed at your suffering." Patricia considered the question for a long moment. "Because we are not like you," she finally said. "We did not want this war. We tried everything to avoid it. Our people believe that violence should be the last option, never the first. But when we pushed you to that last option, you became something terrifying. The stories my people tell about your soldiers, they do not sound like the peaceful humans we knew before." "That is the point," Patricia said. "You only saw one side of us. The patient side. The kind side. The side that believes in cooperation and understanding. But we have another side, one that we keep hidden because we are ashamed of it. When you pushed us past our breaking point, you met that other side." Trell was silent for a moment. "And now we offer you a choice. Surrender unconditionally, disarm completely, and allow us to teach your people that other species are not prey. In return, we will help you rebuild. We will share our technology and medicine. We will treat you with the same respect we offer to all species who choose peace. And if we refuse," Patricia's expression did not change, "then we will do what we must to protect ourselves. But I hope you will not force us to show you our other side again." The surrender was signed 3 days later. The terms were harsh, but not cruel. The Vexery military was dismantled. Their weapons were destroyed. Heavy reparations were imposed, payments that would continue for generations. But their civilian infrastructure was preserved, their food supplies were protected, and their people were allowed to govern themselves under coalition oversight. Most surprisingly, a cultural exchange program was established. Young Vexery were brought to human worlds to learn about their former enemies. Human teachers traveled to Vexery planets to share history and philosophy. The goal was not to punish the Vexery, but to change them, to help them understand that strength did not require cruelty. On Earth, the victory celebrations were muted. Too many families had lost loved ones. Too many communities were mourning soldiers who would never come home. The war had been won. The cost had been enormous. President Samuel Gray gave one final address to the coalition assembly before retiring from public life. He stood at the same podium where he had declared war 6 months earlier, but he looked older now, worn down by the weight of the decisions he had made. "We proved today that humanity can fight," he said. "We proved that when pushed to the edge, we can be the most terrifying species in the galaxy. Our enemies now know that attacking us carries a cost they cannot afford to pay." He paused, gathering himself for what came next. "But let this also be a reminder to ourselves. We must never become what we defeated. Our strength lies not in our weapons, but in our choice of when to use them. We are not conquerors. We are not hunters. We are a species that dreams of a universe where no one has to be afraid." He looked out at the assembly, at the representatives of 47 star systems who had followed him through the darkest time in human history. "Hope that the next generation never has to do what we did. I hope they live in a galaxy where diplomacy works, where kindness is not weakness, where peace is possible for everyone. That is the future we fought for. That is the only future worth having." In the Prometheus facility, the enhanced soldiers were returning to their cryogenic pods. Their work was done, at least for now. They would sleep again, waiting for another call that might never come. Commander Ryan Blake was among the last to enter his pod. A young technician, barely 20 years old, helped him prepare for the long sleep. "Sir," the technician said hesitantly, "may I ask you something?" Ryan nodded. Double quotes. "How does it feel?" "To have saved humanity, I mean." Ryan thought about the question for a long time. He thought about the Vexery he had killed, about the children he had rescued, about the war that had consumed 6 months of his conscious life. He thought about his family, dead for over 30 years, and about the peace that might finally last. "It feels necessary," he finally said, "but I hope you never have to understand that feeling personally. I hope your generation gets to be the peaceful humanity we always wanted to be." The pod closed around him, and the cold embrace of cryogenic sleep began to pull him under. His last thought before darkness claimed him was of that little girl in the prison camp, the one who had asked what home meant. He hoped she would find out. Across the galaxy, the other species watched and learned. Humanity had shown them both faces now, the open hand of friendship and the closed fist of war, the peaceful diplomats and the terrifying warriors, the patient teachers and the relentless soldiers. The last line of the official Earth historical record for this period reads, "We offered peace. They chose war. We showed them why that was a mistake. And then we offered peace again." It was perhaps the most human summary possible. In the centuries that followed, no species ever attacked human space again. Some said it was because they feared humanity's weapons. Others believed they had learned to respect humanity's values. The truth was probably somewhere in between, but in the quiet corners of the galaxy, in the whispered conversations between alien leaders and the classified files of intelligence agencies, everyone remembered the same lesson. Humans prefer peace. They will try everything to achieve it. They will be patient and kind and forgiving far beyond what seems reasonable. But if you push them too far, if you leave them no other choice, you will meet the other side of humans, and you will never forget it.